Thomas, and I'm a feeding consultant. I'm also a mum of 2 girls, and I'm also a brand ambassador for Organics, a brand I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. And today I'm going to be talking about my own experience as a mum of 2 girls who's had, well, I've had my own fair share of intolerances, allergies, and fussiness with my 2 girls as babies, but also as a feeding consultant. I've had experience of working with families whose children have perhaps become anxious eaters or are incredibly selective about the food that they will or perhaps won't eat, and that's usually due to pre-existing health conditions. And perhaps most of the time those have been diagnosed when they were babies or when they were going through weaning, and perhaps they hit a bump and they then realised that their baby was suffering with reflux or was diagnosed with an allergy or an intolerance. And so what I'm hoping to do today is to impart some of my experience and knowledge to help you with your weaning, but particularly I guess an SOS weaning session, so that you can hopefully relax and have fun with your weaning experience, regardless of which kind of dietary path you're on or which stage of weaning you're at. Speaking from experience as a mum, my daughter Molly was diagnosed with quite severe silent reflux, and the thing I really struggled with, especially being a feeding expert, was finding it quite upsetting that I was struggling to feed my own baby, and struggling because she was unwell with the reflux, and actually she didn't want to eat any of the foods that I was preparing. And so, I mean, Molly's diet, my SOS in Molly's diet was literally, and I have to say, was Organics apple rice cakes. And I really did. I remember being in floods of tears on the floor to my mum saying, I don't think Molly can eat anything else other than rice cakes, because of the reflux, which I'm sure many of you are already aware, is that the esophagus, when babies are born, hasn't quite matured yet. So the milk, because they're lying flat a lot of the time, the milk can reflux up. And gradually that flat begins to mature and the reflux disappears. But for some babies, through weaning, reflux becomes more of a problem. And particularly then when you start weaning and food starts refluxing up. And silent reflux is when babies don't perhaps vomit everywhere, but they are refluxing and burning their esophagus, regurgitating food and re-swallowing it. And also, obviously, some babies do have reflux where they are sick. And so what tends to happen is babies with reflux, when they're weaning, tend to prefer dry foods. And so my daughter Molly would recoil at touching all the nice, lovely, organic vegetables that I prepared for her because they were wet and slippery. She had a head like an owl. She could literally turn her head 360 degrees to avoid a spoon at any rate. And all the fruit and vegetables that I did put on her high chair, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this in the weaning stage, is that she enjoyed playing the drop and watch game. So lovely, delicious steamed carrot, and drop it over the edge of the high chair and watch where it lands, with no intention of actually eating any of it. And so I became very frustrated and I became very anxious, and I realised that she preferred dried foods. And so something which I found that I needed to do was to put my feeding consultant head on as a mum. Excuse me, I'm just going to have some water. And so, I mean, what was great for me was that Molly did enjoy the dry things like the rice cakes and the carrot puffs. And for me, with the daughter who had not only reflux, but also other intolerances and allergies, and we'll come to those later, I'm just going to focus on reflux to begin with, and then we'll move on to allergies and then different diets like gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegan. So something I'd just like to demonstrate to you, which you can do whichever stage of weaning you're at, is something that I call food chaining. And I tend to carry it out quite a lot with older children, but it works really well with babies at any stage in weaning, because we're trying to make a connection between a food that perhaps you have been pureeing. So I've got a carrot baton which has been steamed, and you might be steaming some of these and pureeing them. What I've actually got here today is some of the Organics Just Carrot and Quinoa, which are, they're actually gluten-free and dairy-free. And so what I was struggling with was encouraging my daughter Molly to eat the puree, because as I took a spoon to her, she wouldn't accept it. So what I decided to do was to food chain and to offer also, which some of you or all of you might well be doing already, is offering the baby-led weaning finger food of vegetable alongside the puree. Molly wasn't accepting either of these foods. So then what I need to do is food chain a little bit further and make the connection with something that she did eat, which was the Organics Melty Carrot Puffs. And I'm sure a lot of you already are familiar with these as well. And because of Organics' No Junk Promise stamp, for me as a parent and also a feeding consultant, it was a brand that I really did trust, because I knew that there wasn't anything artificial or anything added to it. It was natural and it was organic. And so for me, their No Junk Promise as a stamp was something that I knew I could trust, and I knew that they were doing their best to set the standards for a food that one was eating. So I was taking the Organics carrot puffs and I was offering them to Molly, but I was dipping them into a carrot puree. I was also dipping her carrot batons into the puree as well. So what we have here is we have a dry bite dissolved food, which many children who have reflux, and many children indeed, really enjoy eating. And she did manage to cotton onto the fact that maybe the other end was still dry and she'd turn it round and eat the other end. But I would dip both ends in and place it on her high chair tray so that Molly could actually grasp the carrot puff, which was dry, because a lot of babies and children who do have reflux tend to not enjoy wet textures, because, as I was saying before, the wet solid food regurgitates a lot quicker and easily, whereas dry foods tend to stay down. So obviously I was food chaining with carrot puffs and carrot puree and carrot batons. You can also use toast and breadsticks with your own homemade purees as well, because again, if your child's got reflux, they can hold something that's dry like toast and perhaps is a familiar food that they enjoy eating, and use your store of ready-made homemade purees from your freezer. And obviously you warm them up, leave them to the right temperature, and spread them on the toast for your baby to self-feed or to gum. And the other things that Molly tolerated with was, in terms of dry foods, were finger foods that she could hold onto that I would make. So I could make things like spinach pancakes, which I've got some of here, which were a pancake base with spinach mixed in, which were a great baby-led food. Yeah. And we also enjoyed patties made with quinoa and beans, and because we did begin to bring her up vegetarian as a baby. And something else that perhaps happens when I was weaning and when you're weaning is I got very anxious and very uptight, and we all know that what we project onto our children tends to be what they then replicate as well. So Molly was becoming a very anxious, which is ironic because I'm a feeding expert, and my own daughter was very, very anxious around food, because I was uptight and anxious because she perhaps wasn't eating the variety of organic whole foods that I was hoping that she would eat. So as a reflux baby, she also didn't really take to acidic foods very well. So something like orange or tomato, Molly would not. I just have to, sorry, I've got someone knocking on the door at the moment, and he's now wearing a face mask and walking around. I can't answer, sorry. Apologies there, a high-vis jacket, I have no idea, sorry. So I was talking about acidic foods and how reflux tends to be exacerbated by reflux foods, and Molly would not entertain the idea of enjoying anything that was perhaps orange or tomato. And so what I decided to do was put my feeding consultant hat on and think about what I do with my clients and how I help their babies, toddlers and children about relaxing and having fun. And so just something simple, a little tip that you can do is singing. And so the important thing as well is modeling for your baby. No matter how young or where they are at the weaning stage, it's really important to be in front of your baby and make sure they can see that you're joining in as well. Because if your child does have allergies, intolerances, reflux, and are beginning to be a little bit anxious around food, the important thing is that you are smiling and happy and relaxed so that they then follow that lead. Sorry, he's just now come around the back. Excuse me one moment. Thank you. So I've got an orange here, and what you could do with your baby is, I mean, they could feel the orange, they could have a feel of the orange, so that what you're doing is you're desensitizing them to the skin and the fruit, and then you can squeeze the fruit. I'm going to squeeze it here onto my plate, and you could just simply sing something like pitter patter.
I'll put it on speaker.
Is that someone talking to me? No? I'm okay? Fine. Pitter patter raindrops, pitter patter raindrops on my plate, on my plate. And your baby can see all the raindrops coming out of the orange, and then you can use your fingers as well, and your baby is watching you, and you can say pitter patter raindrops, pitter patter raindrops on my plate and on my face. And what you're doing is you're going to paint your own face. Yeah, we're all going to get messy and paint your own face with the orange, which Molly would not really even enjoy the smell of. She would gag and retch at the smell of an orange. And what you're doing here is you're showing how you can paint your face with orange, and then you can help your baby to dip their fingers in with the pitter patter raindrops on my plate and on my face. And because babies naturally instinctively put their fingers in their mouth, they might pull a funny face, but also what they were doing is they might rub it all over their face. But it just means that at some point in that process, the orange is going to pass their lips. And obviously what we do when something's on our lips is we immediately lick it. So we're trying to think of little fun things that you can do, of squeezing raindrops, dipping your fingers. Something else you can do with babies who, even if babies are young, you can take their thumb for them, and talk about Tommy thumb, and dip it into the juice. Or the vegetable puree or the fruit puree that you've got, and you can suck your own thumb first and see who can make the loud popping sound. And your baby might not make a popping sound, but they might put their thumb in their mouth and realise, And suddenly, by doing something very simple and fun, an activity in front of your baby, it means that they are being encouraged to enjoy something perhaps they were wary about before. Or maybe that they were refusing to eat when you were perhaps putting it on a spoon, or maybe dipping something. And I've got tomato here as well. So perhaps you've got some kind of a tomato-based meal that maybe your older weaned baby you'd like them to enjoy. And perhaps, again, if they're struggling with the acidity of it, you can use your fingers and you could sing a little song. Singing is a great way just to relax, but also to smile and have fun with your baby. And so you could do we stir, and perhaps it's a homemade pasta sauce you've made with some vegetables in it, and we stir, stir, stir the sauce, stir it round and round. We stir, stir, we give it a kiss, we make the popping sound. And again, you're introducing that idea of getting your baby's hands messy and popping and modelling, letting them see what you're doing as well. And that's really how I tried to help myself to relax with the foods that perhaps Molly was wary or avoiding due to her reflux. And there's lots of things you can do with your baby. Perhaps if you're using something like a little small mirror like this, and you can show your baby how you can paint your lips with the puree and lick your lips, or you paint spots on your tongue. And so it's all about engaging your baby with the food and making it fun, and so you're relaxed and they're relaxed as well. So that's the reflux aspect I wanted to talk about, and the simple activities that you can do regarding that. I'm just going to move all my bits of carrot and everything out of the way and pop them on the floor. There we go. Sorry, excuse me just a moment. So I also had experience as well with both my daughters of having various allergies, and perhaps that might be why some of you are here today, is because of the worry and the anxiety maybe of the rise of allergies at the moment, or perhaps your baby already has an allergy. Maybe they do have a diagnosed allergy, such as something like eczema, or asthma or hay fever. Obviously you need to be very careful introducing foods for the first time, so it is important that you speak to your GP or your health visitor first. But when you do start introducing solid foods to your baby for about 6 months, it's good to introduce the foods that can trigger an allergic reaction in very small amounts. And I want to show you another little exercise or tip which we did with both our girls, Molly and Isla, for peanut butter. And obviously with nuts, they need to be served crushed or ground, and the same as seeds. And in terms of doing this activity, you can do it with peanut butter. I won't smear my face with peanut butter right now, but I will use a little bit of my organics quinoa and carrot puree here. And what you can actually do is you can place small dots of food at the corner of your baby's mouth, like this, and show, or actually do it on your own mouth first, and then show your baby how they can stretch their tongue side to side and up and down. And the reason that this is also helpful is because you're putting the food that perhaps might be a trigger food for allergy on their skin first, so you can see if it becomes red or highly, and obviously wipe it off and speak to your GP or your health visitor. And obviously if something more severe happens, you would call 999 and speak to somebody, or 111. But what you're doing here with this exercise is you are teaching your baby to stretch their tongue side to side, which not only helps with tongue strengthening and moving their tongue around their mouth, but it also helps with their speech development. So that's what I call tongue stretches with dots and spots. And again, you can use a small mirror and get them stretching. This is the other thing I was going to talk to you about as well, is that if your child already has, and your baby has an allergy already, as I was speaking before about Molly with her reflux, when babies or older babies and toddlers do have allergies, they can become suddenly very wary of other foods, and it can be quite challenging to wean onto other foods, because they tend to stick to the foods that they find safe and they know don't cause them discomfort or a reaction. And so when you know that you do have a safe food that your baby can eat and they are not allergic to, they may really, really struggle to engage with that food or to explore that food. And something that I find really helpful is, again, to do some fun things and think about our senses. So obviously we can think about our eyes and looking at food, which babies already do, and they can do from a safe distance while you're holding it. But there are other things that you can do which could show perhaps maybe you've got some broccoli, and it's not a particularly allergenic food, but perhaps it's something your baby is refusing to pick up or doesn't want to eat. And so you can take a piece of broccoli and you can show your baby how to smell it. And smell the broccoli. And if you're modeling for your baby, they're going to want to copy you. And so you can give a piece to them on their high chair and do some smelling. And something else you can do, which is quite fun, is to kiss food. And I do this a lot with older children as well, but it works incredibly well with babies. And what you're doing is every time you kiss a food is you always end up with a tiny bit of residue on your lip. And as you'll see just then, I had a few flecks of broccoli on my mouth and immediately I lick them off. And this is a really fun way to perhaps have an activity around weaning, which doesn't involve sitting and needing to trying to spoon feed your baby who's perhaps wary of new foods or is picking them up and throwing them on the floor. So you can do smelling and kissing. You can do licking or tickling your tongue, and just make it fun. Laugh when you're tickling your tongue. It's really tickly on my tongue. And you might find that even your 7-month-old, 8-month-old, 12-month-old decides they want to do the same thing because it's funny, and they don't actually want to tickle their tongue. They just want to have a laugh exactly the same as you. So it's a really fun, relaxing way. So I always think of it as smelling, kissing, licking, or teeth brushing or gum brushing. And another great thing for weaning is something like frozen celery sticks that you've already peeled, and you freeze them, and the residue in the celery actually has a very mild anesthetic, so it's really great for numbing sore gums or teething. And so you could do it with celery sticks as well, brushing gums. You can always do a hand over hold to make sure that your baby's safe with the food. So really, in terms of any foods that your baby perhaps is wary of due to the fact that they have an allergy, it's always a really great idea to make it fun. And like I was saying before in the reflux examples, is about food chaining. So I've got one of the wonderful organics, broccoli, quinoa, sweet corn and olive oil. So if I was weaning, I would be taking this, and obviously if you do have allergies and intolerances, it's really important to read the food labels. And the foods that I've got here today are all gluten-free and dairy-free. And so I would be combining my broccoli with my organics, broccoli, quinoa, sweet corn and olive oil puree with my baby. So that's our activities for allergies and reflux. And I actually had a little picture here to show you actually of the different things that you can do with your baby, which you can do looking and listening with older babies. So perhaps there might be other foods that they've become wary of since their allergies have become more pronounced. And so you can show them how to look at food and talk about the colour. And listening to food is a way of bringing food closer. So maybe I might like to see if my apple makes a sound by shaking my apple near my ear. It's actually near to my face, which again reduces the anxiety and the wariness of that food. And we've got fingers for I don't know if you can actually see these on my screen, but we've got hands for feeling, nose for smelling, lips for kissing food, tongues for licking. We can brush our gums or our first few teeth with fruit and vegetables and make our teeth marks in it. And there's a little mouse at the end there because it's perhaps a new food that your baby or your toddler is experimenting with. They might have a tiny little mouse nibble. So I think the one thing to say perhaps about allergies is not to experiment by cutting out a major food group. You know, something like milk if you don't have a diagnosed milk allergy, because your baby is not getting the nutrients that they need. So I would always recommend that you speak to a health visitor or GP, who then may refer you to a registered dietitian. And I was going to touch on some gluten-free weaning, mainly because my husband's a celiac, and so when both of my girls were born, we were quite wary about foods with gluten in. And again, it was why I came back to the Faithful Loyal Organics brand because of their safe labelling and their no junk promise. So I knew that these foods were safe for my baby and it was something that I could trust. And so we were avoiding gluten in the beginning because my husband being celiac, until we could get our girls tested, we wanted to make sure we weren't introducing any foods with gluten in that could cause them other issues alongside all their other allergies and intolerances and reflux. So I just wondered whether, because I'm just looking at the time here, whether to pause there, because I seem to have some orange squares flashing on my screen. So I thought perhaps I might ask Zena quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had one question come in already, actually, from Annette. And she wants to know, if we have a nut allergy, putting nuts on our own faces is completely impossible. Is it a good idea to introduce babies to foods that could potentially have an allergy if the parents do have this allergy? And how would they go about doing that?
Right, well, I wouldn't recommend, if you've already got an allergy in the family, and is that, I couldn't quite hear, but it sounded like the parents have a nut allergy, so they obviously couldn't go about putting...
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Their face. My advice would be that if you already have somebody in your family who has an allergy, and particularly something which is quite severe like a peanut allergy, I wouldn't recommend introducing it to your baby. I would make sure that you spoke to your GP and your health visitor, and then you can do it in a controlled environment. So if you speak to your GP about your own allergies, of which they'll already be aware of, and they will be able to then book your baby in for a controlled test in the hospital, where they will be able to do a peanut allergy test. And there isn't any other way. Obviously, they can do blood tests. If it's already in your family, they will be able to carry out a prick or a blood test. And it's in a controlled environment where they will have the correct medication and support there for your baby. So if you have a peanut allergy already, I would not recommend. I was merely talking about, say, someone for myself who my daughter didn't have. Molly didn't have allergies. My second daughter did have allergies, so I was more wary the second time round. But I was simply saying that's something you can do if you don't have any allergies in your family and you want to. It is also a good idea to actually introduce the trigger food, something like nuts and eggs, around 6 months, because delaying it actually isn't advised, and the NHS don't advise to delay it because it could actually increase the reaction if there's going to be one. So my suggestion is to speak to your GP and get a proper test done for your little one so that you can be assured whether they do have a peanut allergy or not.
Okay, Danica's got a question for you as well.
Hi, I did baby-led weaning with my bigger boy who's 2.5 now, but he struggles to eat wet foods, as in spoon foods. He's a really good eater. I'm not worried about him nutritionally because he'll eat anything I give him, meats, fish, vegetables, nuts. He's a good eater as far as variety. Yeah. But if I want it with the family, if we want to have, say, soup or bolognese or porridge, he won't eat a spooned wet food. And I wonder if I've done that to him through doing just baby-led weaning, so foods he can hold and eat, which is what he likes now, foods he can put his fork in and eat, and how I would go about correcting that, for want of a better word, and how to not do it again if that's what I've caused while I'm just starting out baby-led weaning with my second.
Sure, thank you, Danica. I think the most important thing here is to impress on you that you haven't done anything wrong, because the most important thing here is to actually acknowledge the amazing, incredible diet that you've got your sorry, is it a little boy or a little girl? I didn't hear you, little boy. Yeah, your little boy eating, which is wonderful, and there's no right or wrong way either, because sometimes you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because I tried to do traditional weaning with Molly and it didn't work, and baby-led weaning was a little bit of hit and miss, and second time round I went down just the baby-led weaning route. If your son is having a wide variety of foods and he is struggling with the wet foods, my suggestion would be is that when it's not a meal time, I would be doing some hands-on messy play activities to reduce the sensitivities that he perhaps has with perhaps touching those wet foods or having them on a spoon. So if you've got, if it's, for example, the mid-morning, you could have some, if you're thinking about porridge, you could have some dry porridge oats in a bowl, and you could have some ones with some water to pour in and mix it round, and he could do the mixing with the spoon. Or you could do something like making dough, which perhaps isn't particularly wet, but if you're making some dough, some pastry, is getting his hands, or it's all about tactile experiences. I think the one thing that would be great to do is to spend any time you have, and I think also if you have a look on the Organics website, in their Wonder Den, there are some great activities there on the Organics website, Wonder Den, for activities to do that I've put together on there. But essentially it's about breaking down the anxiety over the wet, slippery foods that perhaps he doesn't want to eat on a spoon, and getting them on his hands first, because if we can't touch something, we don't really want to take it to our mouth. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, are there any other questions from anyone else? I think that your expert tutorage has taken us far, Lucy. It's fantastic to see that you can turn weaning into a fun game. Would anyone appreciate an upload of Lucy's sheet where she drew? I think it would be quite nice if we can get that and upload it to the website, Lucy, so that we can put that on there for people to refer to. That brings us to the end. Lucy, how can people get hold of you if they want to talk to you separately, not in the weaning workshop?
They can contact me. I'm also founder of Mange2 Kids, so that's www.mange2kids.com, and I'm contactable on there. So if anyone else has any other questions.
Okay, and just very quickly, Joe's just got a sneaky question in it there.